Thank you for joining me for Q&E, quick novel exchange. It's your girl Nyla Adisa, and I am back with a quick radar. What fell on my radar this week, anyway, was the firing of Briahna Joy Gray from the Hills Rising. Um, Now, I'm going to just go quickly into why they say they fired Briahna. So there was an interview done um, on a hostage relative. So it was the sister of a hostage from October 7th attack on Israel by what is being labeled as the terrorist group Hamas. Okay. So Hamas kidnapped the young lady's sister, allegedly. Um, and she was kidnapped, and then she wanted to do an interview specifically with Briahna Joy Gray. So um, I don't think she really wanted to do an interview. I think she just wanted to come on there and say her part and kind of convinced Briahna to, take her side. I think that was the point of the interview, to be honest. I think it was to get sympathy on the side of Israel and to move in sort of that type of direction. So in the interview, Briahna tries to ask her several questions related to the politics. She said she didn't know much about politics. That wasn't really why she was there. Briahna wanted her to kind of expound on how she felt about how Netanyahu was handling, and Netanyahu is the prime minister of Israel, was handling the returning of these hostages, because apparently there's been a lot of protests from the family members of the hostages against Netanyahu because they did not like the way he was handling the return of the hostages. Particularly, there was one time where this has been standing policy. He wanted to kill every Hamas soldier or terrorist. He wanted to kill every one of them and then get the hostages back. Which, anybody knows anything about war would know how likely is that to happen? That you're going to kill every single one of them and then we'll start talking about getting the hostages back. How are you going to know where the hostages are if they're all dead? It's just common sense stuff, okay? So Briahna interviewed the woman, and apparently at the end of the interview, the woman was trying to give Briahna hey, you need to believe women the first time. Now, I don't know about believing women the first time when you have your sister's a hostage. So what story has your sister told you? Did she tell you she was raped? You don't know because you haven't heard from her. So what are we believing? Now, if there are women who have actually said that they were, raped or whatever the case may be by the Hamas, of course, we're going to condemn that. I believe Briahna would condemn that. And she said that several times. If it happened, then absolutely. But that New York Times story has been debunked numerous times. I think most recently it was by the London Times, right? It was debunked that it was just not true. So Briahna kind of rolls her eyes and cuts off the story, right? Cuts off the segment abruptly. And then say that's why Briahna was fired. I disagree. I think that Briahna was fired because Israel, they want to not talk about Israel anymore. And that's and they don't want to talk about the Palestinians being murdered every day. They don't want to talk about the bombs being dropped on them. And Briahna was the one who was bringing this up on a consistent basis through her radars. And Israel is indefensible at this point, particularly after the attack on Rafah by the IDF. Particularly after that happened, they become indefensible because you told these people to go to Rafah, to leave the Gaza Strip, and they had 24 hours to do so, which is their home, by the way. They had to leave their home within 24 hours and go to a refugee camp in Rafah. Go there, and then you would be safe because that was an area they deemed to be safe. And then the IDF bombed Rafah. And there's a particularly disturbing image of a father walking out with his daughter, his headless daughter. child that couldn't have been any more than 3-4 years old. Now you're indefensible. Not only have your words made you indefensible, Netanyahu, and half of the elected officials in Israel. Your words have stated that there is intent, which is part of the definition of genocide, the intentional murdering of a particular group of people. You have already admitted to intentionally wanting to kill these people on more than one occasion, as has half of your elected officials. I don't know what more evidence is needed. I know that this is reprehensible, and the fact that the United States government is backing it is reprehensible, and it is our tax dollars, so it is our business. So Briahna Joy Gray has been let go from The Rising. I think if you've seen any of the exchanges between her and Robbie concerning this, he just kind of goes into temper tantrum mode and doesn't have any actual arguments. He just kind of wants to end the segment. That's it. We're going to go cut. Next story. I'm going to talk to you about this. That's kind of what his arguments are. No real arguments, right? And Briahna is annihilating him every session. Israel has no defense. But the interesting thing that I found was earlier this week, I think it was either on the 13th or the 12th, one of those days, they ran of June, they ran a story about after Briahna started going to all these different news outlets, the real independent media out here. They wanted to run a story saying that Black people in America in particular are more likely to be conspiracy theorists than any other group because, they believe that the government is after them. They believe that they are imprisoned at a higher rate and that the police are against them and all these different things. And even Robbie was kind of like, well, are they lying? Like in the beginning, like he had to concede it, but then he had to, jump back on the libertarian side and jump back on, the soapbox they've given him to be on and say, well, white people are killed just as much as Black people in America. They're shot in their homes too. It's not just Black people that are shot in their homes. And, the problem with that is that, we don't know what happened with these situations because we do know that domestic violence is one of the most dangerous times that cops get in, have to encounter civilians. And a lot of these calls where these people are shot in their homes do come from domestic violence calls where the man is really to kill his wife, himself, and everybody else. And so we need to hear some specific stories so that we can see that, right? Because what we have seen is people getting killed just holding cell phones, people getting killed, not holding anything, just walking. We've seen these things from when Black people are killed. I haven't seen these other stories, and I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm just saying that we need the evidence of it. But in addition to all of that, I guess my question would be, why would the Hill choose to run that story the week they fired a Black woman? Right? Within the week that they fired a Black woman, why would you want to run these stories? Because she's going out here to these so-called conspiracy theorists podcast and newscast, and now you want to make it look like she's just making up something against the Hill. It looks bad. I don't know who's at the Hill running these stories. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to run that. Even if it was already in the chamber to run, I think you would have pulled back on it just a little bit because it looks bad. It looks bad for the Hill. The Hill, I do believe, is legacy media. I do not believe they're independent media. Kim Iverson having to walk away from the show because she felt similarly, because they would not let her interview Dr. Anthony Fauci. If you know anything about Kim Iverson, you know that she was a staunch critic of the COVID response. From the mandates to the vaccines to not having early treatment. She brought up so many different issues. And then she referenced several studies from several different countries because the United States wasn't doing any studies. And Dr. Fauci's in charge of granting money for studies. And she wasn't able to ask him those basic questions. Why haven't you granted money for such studies? Why are you not pulling back money from everything else? If COVID is so bad and people are dying at the rate that you say they're dying at, why are you not pulling back the money to create these viruses in the first place? The gain of function. Why are you not pulling back the gain of function money from those things and then putting it toward an actual study that might help people survive this COVID pandemic? She wasn't able to ask those kind of questions. And because she wasn't able to ask those kind of questions, she felt like it would be not wise for her to go back to her audience on the Hill and try to explain why she wasn't present for the Dr. Fauci interview. And I think that she took the right stance on that. And furthermore, and the reason I say legacy media is because they're getting their money and their funding from somewhere else. It's definitely not by ratings, right? They pretend it's from ratings, but it's not from ratings because Anthony Fauci and Kim Iverson interview would have been off the charts as far as ratings, as far as the money that the Rising would have pulled in. They would be still pulling off money now from that episode, because you know how many podcasters would have clipped that and used that, and it's not the bottom line we're going by. So if we're not going by the bottom line, what are we going by? What is the Hill going by? It has to be, because if you're independent media, and you want both sides of the story, why wouldn't you put somebody on there that had the one person is the literal person that can answer the questions to the so-called conspiracy theorists, and you choose to not let him do that? It doesn't sound right to me. And it makes me think you are legacy media, because you're not gaining any extra money by putting him on there. In fact, she was pulling in over 500,000 views at the time every time she talked about COVID. So what was the force? Like, who's really paying you? That concludes my Q&A for the day. I thank you guys again so much for tuning in. I hope that your weekend is as fabulous as you are. Stay safe.